This is my review of the 2009 Kawasaki Vulcan 500. I've had this bike for about 18 months. It was the first bike I got after I passed the MSF course, and I wanted to provide my amateur review of the bike. I've watched a lot of YouTube videos on bike reviews, and I really appreciate those. I find them really valuable, so I wanted to provide a quick overview of this bike in case anyone's interested in it and give you my thoughts. So, as I mentioned, it's the 2009 Kawasaki Vulcan 500. It's a two-cylinder, 498cc parallel twin engine. It generates about 46 horsepower, according to the manual. It has a 6-speed transmission and a top-rated speed of 90 miles an hour, although I've also seen it rated at 99 miles an hour somewhere. I've never had it that fast. I have had it up to 85 or so, and it does fine. Seems to have plenty of power up at that range, but without a windscreen, the wind gets pretty heavy at that point. But it's classified as an entry-level cruiser. The bike has front disc brakes and rear drum brakes, and I want to touch on the things I really like about the bike, and then a couple of things I don't like, or of all the things I don't like, which aren't very many, but just to give you again my overview of the bike. So first off, I think this is a great introductory level bike, a great beginner bike. It's big enough to ride for a few years, or many years really. It's not a bike that you're going to outgrow or get tired of, but small enough that it's a great beginner bike, as a starter bike or an in-town bike. The bike gets very good and consistent gas mileage. In the last 18 months, as I mentioned, it's consistently gets between 45 and 52 miles to the gallon. I use this bike mostly for commuting and in-town riding, which I think is typically around 48 to 50 miles to the gallon. If I'm out going on longer rides, cruising out, for an hour or two out on the highway, freeway, whatever, it does get a little higher. That's when it gets up to 52 miles to the gallon, but it's very consistent. The bike has a low seat height, which is really nice first of all, for shorter people. You can get both feet on the ground. I think if you were 5 feet taller, you'd certainly have no problem getting both feet on the ground. I'm about 5'10", and it's obviously no problem. But it's excellent for beginners, especially. When I first started riding, you just make some mistakes. I mean, that's pretty typical. And so as I was riding and maybe coming up to a stop a little quick, and maybe I had the bike leaned over a little bit and the bike wanted to go over, having such a low seat height was really easy to catch it and pick it up, and easy to make those kind of mistakes on a shorter bike than a bigger bike for sure. My new bike I have is a Suzuki V-Strom 650, which sits much higher, and I know for a fact that if I had started out on that bike, I would have dropped it on at least one or two occasions, just for that very reason, that as it sits up higher, as it starts to go over, it's just not quite as easy to catch. So a great bike for that purpose alone. And again, if you're shorter, it's a really nice bike. I feel this bike makes a perfect in-town cruiser or short commuter bike. It's very comfortable, easy bike to ride. And I think this is true for any level of rider, even if you've been riding for years and years, just want an in-town bike. This is a great bike. It's light and easy to pull out of the garage. I know it sounds kind of strange maybe, but if you have a big heavy bike and you have to lug it out, back it out of the garage, move stuff around to get it out, you may be less inclined to go for a ride. This bike is very easy, relatively light compared to a lot of bikes, and sometimes on those nice sunny day when you just want to go out for maybe 15-20 minutes, this is the bike I end up taking out and going for a ride, just because it's such an easy, convenient bike to take out and get on the road. The bike is an excellent value. You can find these bikes on Craigslist for very reasonable prices, or at dealerships for that matter. For the price, it has a lot of features. Good engine, 500cc engine or 498cc engine is great. The speed, is plenty fast, and it's a comfortable bike to ride for the price, especially. I'd recommend this bike if you really want to go with a Harley Davidson or something, which are great bikes. but they're awfully expensive. And if you, as a first bike, if you really don't know how much you're going to ride or if you're going to really love it or not, you get a bike like this, you're out a couple thousand, $2,000-$3,000 for a used one. Try it out, and if you really love it, sell it. You're not out much money, and then move up to the Harley Davidson or something like that, a bigger cruising bike. But if you end up not liking riding, you're not out nearly as much money. The bike is fun and enjoyable to ride. I've touched on that. I also ride the V-Strom, but it's especially on sunnier days, because I don't have the windscreen on the bike. I don't have a lot of other things for weather protection or wind protection, but on in-town commuting, short rides, I actually prefer riding the Vulcan 500 over the Suzuki V-Strom, which seems kind of strange. I was surprised by that myself, but it's the bike I end up pulling out more often than the V-Strom for just 15-minute rides. The bike also sounds good. I mean, that's very up to personal opinion, but I have 2 teenage kids, and they actually like the sound and the look of the Vulcan, this bike, over Suzuki V-Strom. The parallel twin engine has kind of a very unique sound to it. Nothing like a Harley, but it still has a really nice sound to the engine, where the V-Strom has it's just a different sound. I just say I like the sound of this bike, and in this video, hopefully you'll be able to hear it, or other videos you can hear the bike. I think it sounds pretty good. One thing with the Vulcan 500, it's a carbureted bike. It's not fuel injected. I mean, fuel injection is very nice to have. All else being equal, you definitely want a fuel injected bike. However, that costs more money typically. You find that on higher end bikes. The Vulcan 500 actually warms up really fast, and that's the problem with some of the carbureted bikes. Is you get them out, you've got to put the choke on, warm them up for a while, and there are some cold-blooded bikes out there from the reviews I've read. The Vulcan 500 is not one of them. You put the choke on, you fire it up, and by the time I get my gloves and helmet on, it's warmed up and ready to go. And that's at 37, 38 degrees. When it gets up into the 60s or 70s, I still start it with a choke and let it run for 30 seconds, and it's good to go. So if that's a concern, I wouldn't get hung up on that for this particular bike. And generally, smaller bikes like this have fewer or lower overall cost of maintenance. It's an easy bike to work on if you choose to work on bikes yourself. It's also cheaper to take into the dealership. There's not a lot of, there's not a bunch of fairings and other things that have to be taken off. It's a fairly straightforward engine to work on, so it's a just cheaper bike. Overall cost of maintenance is cheaper. Another thing I like about the bike, this is stock. I don't have really anything on it, but there's a ton of different aftermarket parts you can add to it. There's backrest and saddlebags and windscreens and cruiser bars, and I mean, you go online, there's a ton of stuff, so there's a lot of options to keep the bike kind of new and interesting as you upgrade it, if you choose to do that. I've kept it very stock because I just like it that way. Things that I say I don't like about the bike, or things that are not as enjoyable about this bike, is it's small for me. For if I do 2-up riding, if I take my wife out for a ride, it's just 500cc engine at 46 horsepower is not have a lot of pulling power for 2 people, unless you're both in that maybe 100 pounds, which I'm not. If you're it has a hard time. The top rated weight on the bike, I think, is actually 400 pounds is what it says it can carry, but anywhere above 250 or 300, it bogs down a little bit when you get 2 people on the bike. So that's something to consider if that's your main objective. I know people who ride this bike from my other reviews, and they say they're fine with that, but for me, it's just a little sluggish. It would be nice, as I've been riding now for almost a couple years now, that it had a little more power. I mean, so if out on the freeway, on highways, if you want to accelerate a little more, passing cars, once you're up at 40-50 miles an hour, it takes a little longer to speed up. But that's that's a 498cc bike with a 46 horsepower. That's what you get. But that's something to keep in mind. If you've been riding for quite a while, it isn't the most powerful bike, but I've had no issues with the power, in the city driving, commuting, anything like that. It's really been nice. Um, the, this bike, if, at a 28-inch seat height, at the size of the bike, if I go on longer rides and I start to go ride over an hour on the bike, it starts to feel a little bit cramped. I mean, it's just the seat is a little short. The seat actually is comfortable for a bike like this compared to a lot of other bikes I've ridden, but it is a little bit short. I think if you were over 6 feet tall, that could be a concern, just because it's just fairly short. I'm fine up to an hour. After that, it's just gets a little cramped for me. I mean, again, not that this is a comparison between the V-Strom by any means, but that's my frame of reference. And the V-Strom I can ride for hours and not have any issues with it. This bike I can ride for about an hour, and then I really got to stop and get off and just stretch the legs, just because it's a little cramped. I think if you were, maybe a little shorter, under 5'6" or something, that probably wouldn't be as much as an issue, because you just have a little more leg room on the bike. A few things to consider if you're thinking about buying the Kawasaki Vulcan 500. There are other bikes that compete with this bike. When I was looking to buy this bike, I was comparing it with one other bike in particular, and that's the Yamaha V-Star 650. And I did a ton of research and YouTube videos, and I appreciate everybody doing reviews on the bikes out there. And the V-Star 650 was the other bike I was looking at, and I bought this one just because it came up at the right price at the right time for me. And I think the V-Star 650 is a real is a nice bike that you could look at as well. So that might be something to consider. The Vulcan 500 is a great introductory bike. As I mentioned, if you're looking at getting a Harley or a bigger bike down the road, this is kind of a low risk, low cost option to get into riding. And if you don't like it, you don't find it as enjoyable as you want, you can sell it and not be out nearly as much money if you were to go out and buy a brand new bike, for sure. So knowing what I know now, would I buy the Vulcan 500 again as a first bike? Yes, absolutely. I would take a closer look at some other smaller sports bikes. If you're, and I say sports bikes because as I'm riding more and more, I like the Ninjas and some of the other sport type bikes. I would take a serious look at the Ninja 250 or the Honda CBR 250 if that's the style of riding you want. So if you're looking at cruisers, this is a great bike to go with. If you're looking at sports bikes, I would look at a Ninja 250 or Honda CBR 250, which are great bikes. The other thing is if you've never ridden before, you're really nervous about riding, it certainly doesn't hurt to go with an even smaller bike. There's a Honda Rebel 250. They make some 250 cruiser bikes, and those are usually the bikes they have at the MSF safety course training sessions. And I would get one of those. I mean, the smaller the bike, the better, really, to start off with. You can ride it for 6 months or a year and move up to a bigger bike later on. The reason I got the Vulcan 500 is I knew I would outgrow a 250 fairly quickly because I had ridden dirt bikes in my past. So I felt comfortable with the 500, and I certainly enjoy and I appreciate. I think it was the right decision for me in the bike I purchased. So yeah, those are my thoughts. If you have any questions, you just drop a line on YouTube there, and I'll respond accordingly. But I like the bike, and I hope you get the bike you want and enjoy riding. Thanks.